God, for this day. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for the book of Psalms and their importance to our faith. And so we offer ourselves now to you and pray that you would teach us about them, that we would incorporate them more deeply into our lives, into our faith. And we ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. So singing. Turn on. So singing has always been a very important part of worship, both in Judaism and in Christianity. It's been really essential to our worship. That's why if you notice the gospel lesson, it's the Last Supper. After the Last Supper, after they shared the meal, it says in verse 30, when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Music was part of the Last Supper. And then in Ephesians, the epistle lesson, especially verse 19, where it says, "But be filled with the Spirit as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs among yourselves, singing and making melody to the Lord in your hearts." There's a similar verse in Colossians 3:16 where Paul writes, "Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and with gratitude in your hearts. Sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God." So in the very scriptures that we have, we're implored to be singing the psalms. And the psalm was really the original songbook. Psalms we can really refer to as a prayer book, but it's also a songbook. And the songs are poetry, they're lyrics that are meant to be sung. In fact, the word psalm, it comes from the Greek word for the name of the book, psalmoi, and it literally means music accompanied by a stringed instrument. Music accompanied by a stringed instrument. And when you read some of the psalms, if you have a Bible, sometimes it'll say for the sons of Korah, they actually give brief instructions about how to sing or how to play the song. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any of the actual music has not survived over time. So we don't actually know the melodies or what they actually sang. But the Psalms are a very, very important part of the life in Judaism and became in the life of Christianity. Now, let me just give you a brief synopsis as we're going through the Old Testament, and I want to really think of and focus on the Psalms this morning as we're making this journey through the Old Testament to appreciate how important and how actually essential it is in our own life, in our own faith. So, actually, this could be question and answer. Does anyone know how many Psalms there are in the book of Psalms? Be brave. Anyone, how many Psalms? 150. There are 150 Psalms. Anyone know what the longest Psalm is? Psalm 119. Anyone know how many verses are in Psalm 119? 176 verses in Psalm 119. Anyone know what the shortest Psalm is? 117. And anyone know how many verses are in that? Two verses are in Psalm 117. That's quite a stretch, 2 verses to 176. So there are different Psalms. Some Psalms were made for liturgy, in other words, in worship. Psalm 136, we actually used a portion of that in our opening a couple of weeks ago. It's quite a long psalm, but the first line will say something about God, and the second, there's a refrain, "And the steadfast love of the Lord endures forever." At every verse, there is "the steadfast love of the Lord endures forever." That is the refrain, and so that was clearly meant liturgically. There are a number of psalms, Psalm 120 to Psalm 134, that are called the Songs of Ascent. And scholars are pretty sure these are psalms that pilgrims sang as they were going to Jerusalem. As they were going up to the temple in Jerusalem, they would sing these songs. These are called the songs of ascent. Some songs were made for teaching, and I think Psalm 119 is an example of that. It's 176 verses, but each verse, it's broken into groups of 8 verses, and each verse, it goes in ascending order, begins with the letter in the Hebrew alphabet. So the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet is Aleph. And so the very first psalm begins with Aleph. And then there's a next group of 8, and that group, the next word in Hebrew is Beth. And so then that series of 8 begins with Beth. And then Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, Haleth. So it's in blocks of 8, and it's meant for instruction. They think probably it was used for instructing people how to learning about the law and about God. And there are a variety of other aspects of the Psalms as well. I'm not going to enumerate at this point. It's important to understand, too, when we think about the Psalms are telling us the truth of poets and musicians. The Psalms are not telling us the truth of the scientist and the engineer. Okay, it's the truth of the poet. Is God a rock? Well, no, God is not a rock. God is strong. There's a lot of metaphor and imagery used in the Psalms. So we need to remember that the Psalms are really very powerful, but it's the truth of the poet and the musician. There's also something powerful about the Psalms. I call it the stance, and that is every feeling, every emotion, everything we experience, or everything that we can say is demonstrated or captured in the Psalms. There's every feeling, every emotion. It's really captured in the Psalms. Athanasius, who was a 4th century theologian, wrote, "Most of Scripture speaks to us. The Psalms speak for us." And then Ann Robinson, who's the author of this book in the Old Testament that we're doing currently, says, I think, something very powerful and very important. She says, "The Psalms are packages of condensed emotion. Their joy is infectious. Their fear is palpable. Their anger burns hot. And their questions are very frequently their own. The Psalms don't show us how God's people should pray. They show us how God's people did pray in the good, the bad, and the ugly of life." Now that's very powerful for us, because sometimes when you read a Psalm, some of the angry Psalms, they're wishing evil upon the enemy. There'll be some things that it's like shocking to us. And one of the things I appreciate about the Psalms is the rawness. And one of the things I've incorporated when I do pastoral counseling a lot of times is when people are very upset and angry, and I say, "Well, have you told God that?" And sometimes people say, "Oh, no, I don't do that. I know growing up as a young man, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be angry with God. I wasn't supposed to have, I was just supposed to feel certain things." And the reality is our feelings are our feelings, and it's not that we feel them that's bad. It's what we do with our feelings that can be either good or bad. And so one of the things I loved about the Psalms when I first realized that we can bring every feeling that we have to God. And when we're in dire straits and we're angry, we can go to God and say, "I'm angry, I'm mad at you." It's like some of the things, sometimes you'll read a psalm and you think, "Wow, this is a right psalm." Then you'll say, "Oh, will you defeat or destroy my enemies?" And you think, "Whoa, boy, that's kind of violent, and we shouldn't want to do that." But that's what Ann Robinson really picks up, is that God accepts the rawness of our feelings, and we can bring, if it's incredible joy, and there are psalms that are incredibly joyful, incredibly praiseworthy, but when we are in desperation, there are psalms there where if you're feeling utterly depressed, you could just call out and read these psalms. Or if you're enraged and angry at other people, you can kind of bring this to God. And and God takes it. God accepts what we feel and what we experience. And for me, personally, that was such a liberating thing to understand that as a follower of Jesus, I don't have to have faux feelings. If I have really raw, angry feelings, I don't have to hide them from God. Yes, I need to ask God to help me so I deal with them appropriately, but I can bring those to God. God invites us to do that, and that's one of the things I think that's so powerful about the Psalms as both a prayer book and a song book. And so I wanted to the device that the Psalms use, that Hebrew poetry used, was parallelism. It's not like they rhyme the last words of each verse. So what they do is parallelism. So in Hebrew poetry, there'll be a part of a verse that will say something, and then right under that will be another verse that will say substantially the same thing in different words. Or sometimes it can be at the antithesis. So for example, in Psalm 7:9 reads, "Oh, let the evil of the wicked come to an end," okay, end of stanza, "but establish the righteous, you who test the minds and hearts, O righteous God." So it's either parallel, they're saying basically the same thing, or they're antithetical to one another. Now I want to spend a moment just on Psalm 19. Psalm 19 is one of my favorite Psalms, and again, if you look in verse 1, you'll see the parallelism. The heavens are telling of the glory of God, end of the stanza, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. And pretty much as parallelism is used throughout this psalm. And the first 6 verses are just really declaring the glory of God in creation. And then between verse 6 and 7, there's a switch. And then rather than it being the glory of God in creation, it's the glory of God in the Torah, in the law, in the teaching. And so the psalmist is just acknowledging and praising God. And I'll just read verses 7 through 10 again. It says, "The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul." Parallel next, "The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple." And that's something that comes over and over in both the wisdom literature and Psalms and Proverbs, is that people who spend time with Scripture and kind of take it in, it gives wisdom over the long haul. "The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinance of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb." And then verse 14, you've probably heard before. Sometimes pastors, if you've been to other churches, will say this. You'll hear this. It says, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer." So this is really it's a wonderful psalm, and it's so wonderful. And since we're talking about music, I'm actually going to teach you how to sing part of it. Okay, and fortunately, Heidi is going to help me. And that's a big fortunate, because you would not learn this if it were just on me. So this is a wonderful psalm. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be singing verse 7, and then verse 10 is the refrain. So we're going to do 7, 10, 8, 10, 9, 10, and then we end up with verse 11 as well. And so because the Psalms are both the prayer book and the song book, I just want you to realize how really beautiful they can actually be. So Heidi's going to teach us the chorus first. Okay?
I'll sing the first verse, we'll go back to that chorus and then get the verses as you go along. So here's the first one we're going to sing. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple. For to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and drippings of the honeycomb. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes. For to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and drippings of the honeycomb. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinance of the Lord are true, and righteous altogether. For to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and drippings of the honeycomb.
You did that very well. But I think it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful example how the Psalms are made to be sung. And any of you are familiar with Amy Grant, her song, the Word, I guess. Thy Word? Is anyone familiar with Thy Word? That comes from Psalm 119, verse 105. Thy Word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And if you're interested in that, you can go to YouTube and just put Thy Word by Amy Grant, and it'll come up, and you can listen to that. And so I want to suggest that this summer, I actually figured it out. I want to encourage you to read through the Psalms. And I figured out how many days are left until Labor Day. If you started now, if you read 2 2/3 Psalms a day, you could get through them. So I rounded up. So what I'm suggesting is try reading 3 Psalms a day. Now, you need to use judgment on that because there are some Psalms that are really short. So you might come to a section, you could read 6 Psalms very easily. If you're reading Psalm 119, you might want to break that into 2 days. All I'm saying is be flexible on that. Because the Psalms are so important. And I started reading the Psalms regularly many years ago, actually around the time I started at this church. And over time, the Psalms begin to shape you. They shape your prayer life. They shape the way we actually pray. And so I read Psalms every day. I read some of the Psalms every single day, and I've noticed over the course of my life, for the last 20 years anyways, I can see how it's shaped my own prayer life. They're very, very powerful. And in fact, Eugene Peterson, whom I've quoted frequently, he's one of my mentors through reading, he wrote this: "For men and women who are called into leadership in the community of faith, apprenticeship in the Psalms is not an option, it is a mandate." The Psalms are powerful. Sing them, memorize them, read them, use them in your devotions because they're really a gift from God. And the wonderful thing is, whatever feeling we have, whatever state of mind we're in, depressed, happy, ecstatic, enraged, God can accept all of that. And so we can offer that to Him in prayer. And so I just want to conclude with, let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer.